a number of you guys who are, I'm guessing, considering EA tooling, looking at how we can uplift your security posture in your organization. And there'll be a slide at the end to look at booking in a time to catch up with some of the team members. So we've got everyone on the call. Most of the people here will be recording the session and we'll be sharing it out afterwards. And we'll probably edit it in case I mumble anything, but all good. Let's whip into a couple of things. Just quickly on who Kapish is. And a lot of you guys probably already know, but there's probably some new people in the crowd. And Kapish partners with SAP on two of their offerings around LeanIX and SAP Signavio. And Kapish has been the main LeanIX partner since about 2018. You'll see Craig Stanley's face on the call. Craig has pioneered the relationship with SAP over the last few years, which has got us to the point of we've got around 70 customers across ANZ and a whole bunch of really good IP that goes along with the LeanIX suite, right? Which is some of the stuff that you're about to see today. Josh Harding is going to take us through a few things there. So we're focusing on how to uplift your security posture within your organization, how to understand the different controls that you've got, how your applications are meeting those controls, the effectiveness of those controls. If we've got time, we might look at some of the risk stuff, but that's probably another conversation for another day. And we've got a fairly well-established community across ANZ. So you'll see there on the 31st of July, we are hosting a SAP LeanIX user group at the SAP office in Sydney, and we'll probably share some registration details for that later on as well. And we've got a good community across the major sort of East Coast, Perth and Wellington as well. All right, look, some of our sort of great customer base, and the reason why I show this is because a lot of these are highly referenceable customers, and we'd be more than happy to sort of make introductions and share details around sort of some of the value that these customers have gotten. And most people are fairly happy to talk and sort of share their story as well. Just quickly on look some of the challenges, and security is obviously front of mind for board and executives, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are getting asked questions about this fairly often around what is our sort of security posture as an organization, where there are potentially some risks that we need to address, what's our plan, all of these types of things. And it all starts with having a really clear understanding of what you're doing as a business in this space, and sort of being able to start to democratize the input of that information as well. So Josh is going to show some really cool things around how we can use surveys and sort of calculated fields and things like that on the fact sheets to be able to show some of the outputs of the reporting that we're going to get to in a moment. A lot of businesses that we talk to these days have a sort of a lack of an enterprise-wide view of their security and how that maps to the different systems that they're running and all that sort of stuff, and understanding if the controls they do have in place are actually being effective, and if not, what should they do as a business. Yeah, so look, some of the outcomes that we'll see today are sort of around enhanced security management, having a centralized repository for your control library, being able to standardize some of your compliance. So hopefully after a successful implementation of this add-on, it should be able to sort of ease some of the burden of audits, reporting, compliance checks, and things like that as well. And some of the outputs are around dashboards, reports, real-time visibility, which Josh will jump into a little bit more soon. This is the key piece of the IP that we've developed. There's a lot more to it, but this is a fairly neat slide for sort of visibility. And a lot of you will be fairly familiar with the meta model. And what we've done is we've implemented a control and a risk fact sheet add-on, and we've configured those fact sheets in a way that enables you to get these insights that we've just spoken about, and Josh is going to go into a bit more detail. But it's about adding those two fact sheet types to your meta model. And yes, as an admin in LeanIX, you can probably go in and add a controls fact sheet to your meta model, but the way that it's configured and the way that it interacts with all the other fact sheet types, the way that the surveys are implemented, all these other key things behind the scenes is what gets you the results, and what we'll go through today. I think that was all from me. I had Josh now doing his sort of session, 20 minutes or so, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. If you want, you can pop some questions in the chat throughout the session. If something comes to mind, I'll get to it. Marianne and myself and Josh will answer those questions. And if you want to raise your hand, you're more than welcome to shout something out as well towards the end. All right.
Amazing. Thanks,
And I
Ollie.
might just get the rest of the Kapish team to go cameras off while Josh is presenting so that there's no distractions from the great work. And we'll go from there. Thanks, mate.
Awesome. Thanks, Ollie. So now we'll jump into a little bit of a demo of the offering that Ollie had just spoken briefly about. We'll show off some of the reports that we can get at the end, and then jump into a little bit of sort of how the magic works and how we can get there. We won't go too technical today, so we'll keep it sort of understandable for everyone, but hoping to show off some of the extra capabilities and magic that Kapish have developed around the information security piece. Looking at some of the reports that we'll jump into, I've just structured a few of them on a dashboard here, which is a really great way of having multiple either reports or diagrams or various types of charts clustered together for a specific use case or for a specific person. Makes it really easy to consume any of the information that you'd be having as part of those reports. For the purposes of the demo today, we'll just be looking at applications and controls, but the same logic could be applied to your IT components, your technologies, your business processes, or any other fact sheet. Just for simplification, we'll be looking at applications today. The first report that we'd look at is what I guess we would consider like a really standard view of what we would want when assessing our control effectiveness. We would just want to understand which controls are relevant for which applications and how effective they are. On our application control effectiveness report, what we're doing is we're looking at all of our different applications and we've rolled up the number of controls for those applications and just grouped them together by how effectively each of those controls are implemented. So for example, for my CID application, I can see that I have 3 of the relevant controls are fully effective and implemented. I can see 11 are partially effective and have minor gaps, and I can see 5 are partially effective with major gaps, and 1 actually we haven't implemented at all. And this rolled up view is a very clear and easy way to see at a high level my maturity of my controls across my application portfolio. Like any of the reporting in LeanIX, we can change the layout mode to maybe be in a stacked view, so we could see the individual controls that are then relevant for each application there if we wanted to go down a little bit more granularly. But at a high level, the rolled up view is a really quick way of just looking at that very easy to see information. How effective are my controls for each of my applications? Another report that I might want to look at is to reverse the clustering to get a bit of an understanding of, well, how well implemented is a particular control on average across my application portfolio. So I can see we're using a list of demo controls here. Now, in a real implementation, we would use whatever controls framework you would be using within your organization. The implementation is completely framework agnostic, so it could work for NIST, for ISO 27001, for any other custom step that you might have developed internally as well. And then I can go down to my different levels of controls and down to my sub-control. So within my demo control set, I have my access control and authorization control, and then I have my access control sub-control, for example. From here, I can see that related to my access control, I have 2 applications that have implemented it fully effectively, 5 with minor gaps, 4 with major gaps, 1 ineffectively, and 6 that we actually haven't even performed our assessment on yet. So I know it's appropriate for those applications to be related to the access control, but I haven't completed my assessment of those yet. What I could do with a view like this is I could scroll through and I could sort of identify where I've got some major gaps. So for example, within my compliance control, we actually have 3 applications that have not implemented this control at all. So that would be something that I, as a responsible person for the compliance control, would maybe want to look into a little bit further. Some of the other ways we can consume the information in this add-on as well is to look at it with the other types of information that we've already got in LeanIX. So in LeanIX, we would already have an understanding of what our confidential data objects are, how our applications are using those, and how risky is the technology supporting those applications. So is there any form of risk because a piece of technology is out of vendor support, for example? So on a matrix view like this, what I've done to set up this report is I've just shown on the left-hand side my data objects that are being used by my applications, and I've filtered it down to just my highly classified data, so my super confidential data objects. I'm then looking at the top at my cryptography control, so understanding how well implemented my cryptography control is. And in the middle, I'm just grouping the applications together based on the data object they're using and that relationship to the cryptography control. So what I can see here, for example, is I've got one application that's using designs data, which is highly confidential for us, and it's actually got a non-implemented cryptography control. So that's already going to be a little bit of an area of concern for me. If I change the view to stacked, for example, I can then see that it's the CID application that has that issue. But if I overlay some other information as well, perhaps I change the view to be looking at the obsolescence aggregated risk of my applications, I can now see that CID actually has an unaddressed end of life technology associated with it. So if I click on CID, I can see on the side panel, if I scroll to the bottom, that it's actually the database that it's using that is actually out of vendor support. So using this, I've identified an application that has an out-of-date database. It has a non-implemented cryptography control, and it's using confidential data within my organization. So that's going to be a massive area of risk for me that I've been able to identify by combining the Kapish information security add-on with some of the other information that you would already be capturing in LeanIX anyway. I also want to show some of the other ways that we can cluster and group our different controls. Some of you might be familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is that detect, identify, protect, recover, respond, etc. And we can actually group our controls into these different areas of the cybersecurity framework. And we could do some reporting on that at the end to say, well, for my detect anomalies and events area of the cybersecurity framework, I'm a 3 out of 3 because my controls are implemented well across that area. Whereas I might see within my identify governance, I've got a current score of 1.3 with a target of 3. So I've actually not done very well with my controls that are related to that area of the cybersecurity framework. So I can see that that's where we would need to be uplifting. And just to show off some of the other capabilities of a dashboard as well, we can also do what's called charts, where we could maybe look at our implementation and our maturity of our cybersecurity framework. So I can see here, I've got 52% of my cybersecurity framework. I've almost met the target. 9% have met the target. 1 isn't met, and we don't have enough information to assess for the other 35% just yet. I can then also track this over time as well using the KPIs in LeanIX. So I can see here, I can look in the last 30 days, well, we haven't had any changes. But if I change it to 90 days, I can see we had a big jump in the meeting of our targets in the last 90 days. And I can get a bit of a time series to understand how well I'm tracking towards meeting my targets or not. Those are the reports that I was going to show today to sort of see, what the output is, what we can get at the end. I'm going to jump in now into the fact sheet, into the controls fact sheet and into the application fact sheet to show how that all interacts and how we can get to these outcomes at the end. Those of you familiar with the meta model will notice that there is the controls fact sheet that has been added here. And if I click on this, I can see all my different subtypes I might have. So technically, you could also run multiple subtypes of controls. So you could run NIST and ISO 27001 as well. For the demo today, we will just be looking at our demo control set. If I open up my control, so this is my access control, what I can do is I can actually relate it to a risk as well. So I can actually identify that, look, this control is in place because we want to mitigate our risk of unauthorized access, for example. So you can align your controls to any other risk framework that you would be wanting to assess your risk against as well. We can see any of the currently applicable applications along with the effectiveness score if that's something we've already assessed. And we can see where it relates to different elements of the cybersecurity framework. So this is where I can perform that mapping to say this control is related to this area of my cybersecurity framework. We get to this application mapping section here, and this is where we define our rules around which applications should this control be applied to. Because not all applications or all technologies or all business processes are going to be subject to all controls within your security environment. So what we can define here is any custom set of rules. For the demo, we're going for CIA scores. So we're saying that this control is going to be relevant for any application that has a classification score of confidential plus, an integrity score of medium plus, or an availability score of medium plus. Any of the ruling here can be completely custom configured by you, and we would implement whatever rules are required. We now need to get these scores on the application, so then we can actually perform the automation of the mapping there as well. So if I go to an application, maybe training management is the application I'm interested in assessing at this point in time. We can see some of the information that we've already got about our application. So we can see the life cycle when we're using it as an organization. We can see that we've identified a time classification of invest for it. We've set it a 2-star business criticality and a 2-star functional fit for us. We can see that it's supporting the HR training and skills enhancements capability, and we can see it's in use in Australia. But then we get down to the security categorization area, and this is where we can start to get some of those CIA scores available. You'll see that there's already a calculated confidentiality and a calculated availability score because we already have the appropriate information on the application to begin calculating those steps. What we don't have yet is our calculated integrity score. Now, the way that we can get this information in is we can actually build the calculated integrity score based off of the value of maybe several other fields on the application. So to calculate the integrity, we might want to look at the operational impact, the financial impact, the data resilience, for example. Now, you can come in onto the fact sheet and sort of edit it one by one. But if you're doing more than one application at a time, that's not going to be sort of the most effective way to do that. So what we've built is in our surveys, we have our security categorization survey. When we open up this survey, we'll be able to define the scope for the survey. Now, for today, I'm just going to use training management for this one. When I go next, I can see the design. So this has already been pre-configured, so I won't have to make any changes for you. You won't have to make any changes here. We can do a little bit of a preview. So this is what it will look like to the person getting the survey. Now, this would traditionally be sent to the application owners, whether it be the business owner, the technical owner, perhaps both. And you would share this to the appropriate people for them to be able to contribute the appropriate information for this survey. Next, we get the share option. So this will just remind us who we're actually sharing it to. So because I've only chosen the one fact sheet, I'm only sending it to one subscriber, being myself. But if you were sending it in bulk to maybe all of your application owners, you would see the list there of people sending it to. I can then hit go live. It'll remind me that I'm sending it to one person for one fact sheet. And when I hit send, that'll now send an email to any of the application owners in your workspace who will now be able to go in and fill out that information. I'm going to get there just by going back through the fact sheet. So I'm just going to go back to my inventory and open training management. And if I was to click on the link in my email, I would get taken directly to the survey, which is this screen here. What I see now is exactly what I saw in the preview. We can see it's automatically filled in stuff around the business criticality and the information classification of our data objects because that was already information that we had. But I may need to answer some of the other things. So does this system contain information that if modified or destroyed could do severe harm? Maybe the answer is yes. I could give a note if I wanted to explain that answer as well. Would unauthorized modification of destruction cause financial loss? Maybe the answer is yes. And what's the data resilience like? Maybe it's not actually that easy to restore from a backup. So the answer might be no here. If I was responsible for more than one application, I would see down the left all of the applications that I as an application owner am responsible for, and my progress bar would tick along as I complete each one. It's also auto-saving, so I can just come back to it later. I can do maybe 3 applications now is all I have time for. Next week, I can come back and do a few more. It automatically saves your progress as you go. When I'm done, I can hit submit, and that will then now store that data that I've just answered in the survey as information on the fact sheet itself. So if I go back to my fact sheet, and scroll back down to that mapping section, I will see now that I have a calculated confidentiality score of high, a calculated integrity score of high, and a calculated availability score of medium. Now, based on the rules that were on the controls that we went through earlier, we can actually now automate that mapping. So if I scroll down to a section we have in our security categorization triggers, I can assign this control mapping trigger and click ready. Once I've clicked ready, our webhook will now go through and perform all of that automation for us, and it will actually set itself to complete when it's done. So you know when it's finished and you can continue using the application. You'll see in the last updates tab all of the changes that automation has made. So we can see that it's created a bunch of relations here, and we can see that the mapping trigger has set itself to complete. So now I know that it's done all of the mapping that it needed to do, and it's safe to use the other information on the fact sheet again. Now that that mapping has been automated, it will actually automatically there create the relations. So now I can see in this Relations Explorer that there are 20 controls that are related to this application, because based on the rules, those were the 20 controls that were decided to have met the criteria. In the dependencies here, I can now see each of these controls. So I can see my access control, my cryptography control, my asset management control, etc. And depending on how you want to implement it, you could just set the effectiveness score control right here. So I could come in and say, yep, I know that this control is fully effective, so I'm going to mark it as fully effective. Or I know a particular other control is ineffective, so I'm going to mark it as ineffective. But we can actually go a little bit further and do a gap assessment to understand where our gaps are and how effective our controls are implemented. So you'll see that at the bottom, we've also created a relation to a number of questions that we may want to ask to determine the effectiveness of our applications. We can see in our questions control here, we have 60 questions that will now be asking the application owner to determine how well implemented the controls are. Now, this list of questions will change depending on which controls have been mapped, because as we talked about before, not all controls are relevant for all applications. So the automation ensures that you're only asking the relevant questions for the controls that were decided to be upon that application based on the rules that we had defined earlier. What I can see in here now is I can see the question for access control question 1 is, are there procedures in place to manage user access to the application, ensuring least privilege and separation of duties? And I, as an application owner, could give my answer in here, and then a security assessor could come through and say, yep, based on the answer that was given, we're going to say it's ineffective or effective or whatever it might be. We can also perform automations around this as well. So if someone just puts yes as the answer, we can automatically make the question response assessment equal effective as well. There's a number of different automations we can pass through there. Now, doing it one at a time like this would, it would take a little bit of time. So we do have a second survey that you can generate as well. And that's the gap assessment trigger here. If I set this one to ready, what the automation will now go through and do is create a new survey for this application based on the questions that are related to it here. So each application would have a different survey because each application is going to have a different number of questions, or there might be some different questions that are being asked of it. Once again, it'll set itself to complete when you know it's done, and that can prompt me to go to my collaboration tab and go to my surveys. And I will now see that a new survey has been generated, Gap Assessment Survey for Training Management in July of 2024. Now, if I came back and reassessed the app in 6 months and it needed to be another gap assessment, that would say January 2025, for example. So you can do a bit of versioning and control around when your applications were assessed. Clicking on this one, once again, it automatically assigns it to training management for me. I can go through and see all of the questions that have been automatically created in the survey for me, so I don't have to do anything again here. And in the preview, this is what it will look like. So I'll see all of my different questions that will be getting asked to determine the effectiveness of my controls. Once again, I get the view of reminding me who I'm sending it to. And when I click go live, that will send an email now to the application owners again to go through and answer those questions to determine whether the controls are effective or not. Just to skip sort of going through and answering those on the webinar, I'll just open up an application that it's already been done for. So I can see my CID application, for example. If I scroll down to my questions, I can see here where the question was asked, the answer was given, and then what that means for the response. So based on a no to are there procedures in place to manage user access to the application, we're saying this control is implemented ineffectively. Now, there are multiple questions to determine access control effectiveness. So for the next question, we're actually saying, yes, there is user access to the application reviewed and updated regularly. So we might say that's effective in this case. We can then take the weighting of the different effective, ineffective, or not implemented scores and average them up for each control to get an overall view of how effective each control is for my application. So I can see based on the fact I had 2 ineffectives and 1 effective score, that means I'm partially effective with minor gaps for my access control, for example. And it's this value and calculation here that shows in the first report that we looked at, which was our application control effectiveness report. We've then got a number of other automations that go through and apply the appropriate weightings and scores to our different areas of the cybersecurity framework as well. And that's then how we would populate this report, where we look at our cybersecurity framework and determine whether the targets have been met or not met. That's most of the content I had to go through today. Did anyone have any questions or anything? I can see the QA has been popping off, but does anyone from the Kapish side, is there any that need to be sort of answered out loud?
All right, we've got a few, and I'm going to throw to a couple of different people. So the first one was from Mohammed, and I might throw to Craig for this one if you can touch on NVD and IT components, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Mohammed. And for the audience, the NVD being the National Vulnerability Database that NIST provides, giving information about technologies that have got identified vulnerabilities. And the short answer is, as far as our out-of-the-box offering that we're presenting here, it doesn't currently integrate through to that data source. But as Kapish is, one of our offerings is around connecting to external data sources from a LeanIX perspective, using the LeanIX APIs to be able to make those connections. It wouldn't be a stretch for us to ensure that's on our roadmap for this product offering over time. So really good suggestion, Mohammed. So thank you.
Fantastic. We've got one from Ian Gilmore, and his question is survey. And Josh, maybe if you can have a look in the chat there, but its survey questions look like they are asking for the classifications, not the questions that are then calculate up into the calculated classifications. Now that was a mouthful, but does that make sense to you? And if not, Ian, you feel free to elaborate.
Yep, no, absolutely, that makes sense. So I guess there's 2 sets of questions we're asking. One set of questions is the categorization to determine the CIA scores or any other framework that you would use to categorize your applications. And then the second one is to understand the implementation of the control. So that was these questions at the bottom of our application fact sheet, where I could see, are there procedures in place to manage user access to the application, ensuring least privilege and separation of duties? I can answer yes or no here, and then apply a score as to whether this application would have an implemented or ineffectively implemented access control in this scenario.
All right, thank you. We've got Aaron as well, congratulating Josh on the demo and also asking what would the process be to attach the risk data to the enterprise risk matrix and inheriting from the enterprise architecture. Now, if that's one, if you can answer, Josh or Marianne or Craig can jump in. I know that we haven't covered risk on this demo. If you have any demo data, mate, maybe we can have a look, but up to you.
Yep, absolutely. So what we can see here is we've linked our access control to a mitigating risk. So what we're doing is we're saying that this control is mitigating our unauthorized access risk. Now we might have more than one risk that it's mitigating, and one risk might be mitigated by more than one control. It's a many-to-many relationship that we can define. In our reporting, what we could potentially do then is, say, look at a control landscape report, and I might want to cluster by my risk, my mitigating risks. I'll filter this down to just some of the demo stuff that we looked at today. And perhaps I want to look at the average control effectiveness score for my implementation. So now I can do a little bit of heat mapping around, all right, so for my data loss and leakage, the darker the color is, the more highly on average that control is implemented at a high level. So if I looked at, say, for my unauthorized access risk, I have a couple of controls here that I implemented at about a 2.4 level, which is a little bit low. That's a bit under the average there. So I can do some extra heat mapping to understand where my controls are implemented effectively and how that relates to the overall risk profile. What we can also do is build out additional automations around automatically assigning a risk to an application. So we might do something like, this application has a poorly implemented access control, and therefore this application should have an unauthorized access risk associated with it. So we can then build out the relationship in sort of a triangle there as well, and then perform assessment on the risk likelihood or the risk impact were that risk to come to fruition as well. So there's a much more detailed thing we can jump into there, maybe in a separate dedicated call. Wanted to keep it a little bit more palatable today.
Awesome, thanks, mate. We've got Diego is asking around, is it possible to automatically retrieve information from pipelines for policy as code and IAC control status? Example, if security testing is enable encryption. I'll let you read that one, mate, if you can have a look at from Diego.
Yep, absolutely. So another service that Kapish provides is to be integrating any other system with LeanIX as well. So if there's any other GRC tool that you're currently using or any other policies tool that you're using, we can integrate LeanIX with that as well and just automatically pull the relevant information from the relevant sources to contribute to your overall reporting at the end.
Thanks, mate. And the next one from Mohammed is around, do we have a predefined set of control questions available within the tool rather than relying on a user to determine what the question is to type? Now, I might answer this one, and the answer is that Kapish is relying on the information from the organization. We're not making recommendations to you around what is the most effective set of controls to use as a business. We're taking the data that you guys currently have and implementing that into the tool. The team on this call today is probably not qualified to offer detailed cybersecurity consulting work to you. So it is relying on the information that you guys are using as a business. Another one from Ian. So this is a detailed one, Josh. I might let you read that in the chat.
Yep. Ian, that's a great question around it sort of being a little bit general in the demo that we went through today, asking, has anyone customized it to be a little bit less up to the survey answerer to understand if they comply? For example, does this comply with access policies? Everyone will just answer yes to avoid any of the follow-up work. Now, the demo questions that we went through today were just that, demo questions. You can certainly go down to any granular level of information that's required. You do also have the ability to upload other like PDFs or any other document into a LeanIX fact sheet as well. So you could even actually ask for documentation around the person understanding that, yep, here's the proof that it does meet the access control, for example. So you can get a lot more complex and a lot deeper than what we went through today.
Thanks, man. And Darishna, I might take this one. So the question is asking, are the risk and control fact sheet custom built or were they pre-built by LeanIX? So they're available as a LeanIX admin to add in any new fact sheet type as you like, whether it's a value stream fact sheet or a control fact sheet or a risk fact sheet. But just turning on the fact sheet doesn't mean you're getting the outcomes that Josh has shown today. So the IP that Kapish has built is the customization of that fact sheet and all the different fields, the calculated fields, the interaction between the fact sheets that is the IP that we've built. Just turning on a control fact sheet doesn't get you the outcomes that you saw today. So the short answer to your question, it is custom built, and it's something that Kapish has developed over the last couple of years. And it's probably a good time for me to plug our link here, where anyone who would like to know a little bit more, who would like to book in a call to talk about pricing, proposals, that type of thing, I've popped in a link in the chat where you're able to pop some time in with the team, have a half an hour session to get a bit more understanding of what it commercially is, or maybe even a bit of a deep dive with Josh and utilize some of his time as well. So feel free to use that link. We've got another question, Josh, if you want to have a look at that one around NIST. You're on mute, mate.
There we go. Miroslav has just asked what level of NIST control is currently integrated into LeanIX. So there's no sort of current integration with any controls framework out of the box. The implementation is designed to be completely framework agnostic. So if you can provide us a framework, we can get it to work. There's just no native inbuilt integration to any framework. But that to answer the second part, then, is it only inclusive of the base level or the enhancement controls? Again, completely customizable and configurable by you as to how much detail we go into with the implementation.
Awesome. We've got a little bit more time. We sort of did plan on about 40 minutes or so, but if anyone wants to throw another one in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I'll give you another minute or so to do that. And if not, we can all leave it there and appreciate your time. But yeah, feel free to pop your hand up for a couple more bits, or if, as I said, welcome to put some time in with the team using that link in the chat. I am going to steal the screen share, Josh, and just and showcase this last bit. So if you can't use the link, this is just a QR code that goes to a similar page. And what we'll do after this is we'll send out some more information on some of the upcoming events that we've got. So whether you're in Sydney, you can pop into the SAP office and meet the Kapish team. We've got News Corp, Centre Group, Compass Group, and Department of Education all presenting in Sydney, their LeanIX journey and Signavio journey. And then we've also got an event over in Perth at the sort of mid-August, which will keep you updated on details as well. You'll probably get an email from myself or Jack or one of the team members after this. So it's maybe just trying to set up some time to have a chat. If you can, that's fine. If not, that's all good. And Phil's got one in just before we jump off, mate. Good timing. So can a customer do a framework implementation, or can that only be done by Kapish? As in, is it an open framework that can be used?
Yep, that's a good question. So the service that Kapish are providing here is to build all of those automations and calculations in the workspace as part of an engagement. So whilst technically, as Ollie mentioned before, you could create a controls fact sheet and load whatever controls you wanted into there, what you wouldn't get is any of the automations or reporting outcomes at the end.
Yeah, and Aaron's got one there around, so not offering cybersecurity advice, but in terms of support to accelerate the implementation, what is Kapish offering? So all of what Josh showed today around the surveys, the integrations, the automations, the building of the reports, the configuration of the fact sheets, that's all of the work that Kapish is offering in this. So it's a sort of a one-time sort of startup cost is what this is, and then there's a sort of a yearly ongoing maintenance to make sure that it's running properly. As I said, you're more than welcome to pop in some time to have a bit more of a detailed chat around that. But what you saw today doesn't just magically happen if you turn on a couple of fact sheet types in the workspace. There's a fair bit behind that goes behind the scenes. All right, I think we might leave it there. Thanks everyone for coming out. That was great. And as I said, we'll look forward to catching up later on. But if not, that's all good. And thanks, Josh, for your time, mate. That was great.
Thanks everyone for coming. Hope you have a good one.